The weight of the Mooncrest pack felt heavier these days. And then some days, it felt like a physical stone pressing down on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. Because of that, I often found myself staring out the massive stone window of my study, seeing not the familiar sweep of our valley, but the ghosts of what used to be. The pack, they were restless. A subtle current of unease had been winding through them for months, a weariness I couldn't quite name. Was it just the long winter finally thawing, or something else? Truth be told, I suspected something deeper was wrong, a faint sickness in the wind, but I had no proof, only a king's heavy intuition. Still, my own shadows were darker. 5 years. 5 years since Lyra was ripped from me, her laughter silenced forever by rogue claws. Moments later, after dismissing a nervous beta with a report on dwindling game stocks, my gaze, as it always did, snagged on the small, ornate wooden box on my desk. Locked. Sealed. Just like my heart. She felt it, clear as day, that old ache, Lyra's memory. Inside that box was all I had left, a pressed snowdrop, her favorite, a silver ribbon she'd worn in her fur, the phantom scent of her gone. Why did I even keep it? Did it make the emptiness any less? Deep down, I knew the truth. It was a penance, a way to keep her close, even if it meant never letting anyone else in. This pack unease, this feeling of decay, it was an open loop, a constant worry that gnawed at the edges of my command. Meanwhile, my wolf paced within me, a restless beast of grief and fury. He missed her too, maybe even more than I did, if that was possible. As if pulled by a string, my thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Counselor Malachi. He entered like a silent shadow, his ancient eyes missing nothing. My king. His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly steady for one so old. The early reports on the winter stores are adequate, but the scouts speak of a blight affecting some of the spirit oaks at the valley's edge. Yet, even as he spoke of pack matters, I felt his gaze linger on the locked box, then on me, a silent question in their depths. Did he know how close to the edge I walked some days? Before I could move to respond fully, a sharp, unexpected jolt shot through my chest. Without warning, it was like a branding iron, searing and sudden. Not pain, not exactly. Something else. Primal. Demanding. My breath hitched. What in the blazes was that? I pushed it down, a growl caught in my throat. The blight on the oaks. I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. See to it, Malachi. Use whatever resources are needed. He bowed, his expression unreadable. As you command, my king. As he left, the unsettling feeling in my chest throbbed again, a dissonant chord in the symphony of my grief. This strange new feeling, what was it trying to tell me? The locked box, my unending loyalty to Lyra. How could anything new dare to intrude? This was a complication I refused to acknowledge, setting the stage for a storm I couldn't yet see. The Unity Gala. Another tedious duty I couldn't avoid. That's why I stood on the overlook above the great hall, watching the pack gather, a sea of fur and forced merriment. My wolf hated these events. Too many scents, too much noise, too many expectant eyes. Still, tradition demanded the Alpha King be present, a symbol of unity, even if my own spirit felt like shattered stone. Truth be told, I often felt more like a statue than a king at these things. As if pulled by a string, my mind replayed Malachi's words from earlier that day. My king, the pack needs a Lunar. A strong mate by your side would quell much of this unrest. It has been long enough. His voice, always so reasonable, so persuasive. He didn't understand. He couldn't. How could I ever replace Lyra? More importantly, the very idea felt like a betrayal. No matter how hard they tried. The council, the hopeful mothers parading their Omega daughters. My heart was a frozen fortress. I scanned the crowd below, my gaze detached, analytical. So many eager faces, so many calculating glances. Were any of them truly thinking of the pack? Or just of the power that came with being Luna? She didn't know what scared her more. Wait, this phrase is for Arya. I need to rephrase for Rylan. I didn't know what angered me more, their blatant ambition, or the hollow ache Lyra's absence carved deeper with every passing gala. Looking back, I should have known that fate, or whatever cruel force governed our lives, had a twisted sense of irony. I might have thought, if I'd been given to such introspection. Soon after that bitter thought, as I prepared to make my obligatory descent into the throng, that sharp, unwelcome jolt hit my chest again, stronger this time, making me stumble a step. Without warning, it felt like a magnetic pull, an invisible tether tightening around my very soul. In that moment, I dismissed it as stress, as grief playing its cruel games. What else could it be? My wolf, however, lifted his head inside me, a low growl of interest. No, impossible. This gala, like all the others, would be an exercise in royal endurance, nothing more. But the thrumming in my chest, this insistent, alien pulse, it was a disquieting note in an already somber symphony, hinting that the night might hold more than just tedious ceremony. The great hall was a cacophony, a swirling chaos of scents, sounds, and emotions that grated on my already frayed nerves. Meanwhile, I moved through it all, a king in a gilded cage, offering nods here, brief words there, my wolf on a tight leash. No matter how hard I tried to project an aura of command, of serene power, inside I was a storm of ice and old pain. And then it happened, out of nowhere. A blur of movement, a soft gasp. Her body moved on instinct, or rather, my body moved on instinct. I reached out, my arms closing around something soft, something small that had stumbled directly into my path. An Omega. In the span of a breath, the world tilted. The moment our eyes locked, that searing jolt from before didn't just return. It exploded through me like a lightning strike, 1,000 times stronger. Alpha and Omega. Mate. My wolf roared, a possessive, triumphant sound that only I could hear, recognizing her on a level so deep, so primal, it bypassed thought, bypassed grief, bypassed everything. Her scent, wild herbs and frightened innocence, flooded my senses. And just like that, everything changed. Her mating mark, I could feel its answering heat, its incandescent blaze even through her tunic, a beacon calling to the very core of my being. My heart skipped, or rather, it slammed against my ribs like a wild thing caged. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not ever. But then, the image of Lyra, her dying eyes full of love and sorrow, rose like a shield before me. My Lyra, my only mate. As if fate demanded it, a cold, brutal fury surged, drowning out the bond's fire, drowning out my wolf's desperate howls of protest. Pain, Lyra's pain, my pain, twisted into denial, into revulsion at this cosmic mistake. The space between us burned, yes, but I would quench it with ice. I set her back on her feet, my touch rough, deliberate. Watch yourself, Omega. I bit out, my voice a low, dangerous growl, each word a shard meant to wound, to sever. Without another word, I turned, pushing through the sudden silence, the shocked stares, and fled. Fled like the lowest coward. In the quiet that followed my retreat to a shadowed alcove, my chest heaved. My mark, Lyra's mark, seared as if in protest, or perhaps in resonance with the new one that had just blazed to life on that unknown Omega. That terrified, insignificant Omega. My fated mate. The words were a betrayal. My wolf clawed at the inside of my mind, raging at my rejection, at my denial. What had I done? And what in all the hells was I going to do now? This wasn't just an insult to some random Omega. This was a declaration of war against fate itself, and I had a terrifying feeling fate wouldn't take it lying down.
Come morning after the Unity Gala, the sun felt like a cruel joke. Because of that, I just wanted to stay hidden, lost in the shadows of my small cottage, where the world couldn't see the utter mess I'd become. My shoulder, where the mating mark had blazed so fiercely, now throbbed. A deep, echoing ache, a phantom limb, a bond rejected before it even had a chance to breathe. Truth be told, his words, "Watch yourself, Omega," played over and over in my mind. Each syllable, a fresh stab. And then, when I finally forced myself to fetch water from the communal well, the silence. It was worse than any jeering. Pups that usually tumbled near my feet were quickly called away by their mothers. Other wolves, they just looked right through me, their faces blank or worse, filled with a kind of pity that made my skin crawl. It was like the rejection had painted a fresh coat of invisibility over me, thicker than ever. What could I even do when the Alpha King himself had cast me aside so cruelly? Still, as the day wore on, a new, unsettling feeling began to creep through the pack, a faint tremor beneath the surface of everyday life. Moments later, I saw old Lyra, usually so spry, stumble as she carried her basket. And not only that, young Torvin, one of the most energetic apprentices, leaned heavily against a tree, his fur dull, his eyes clouded with a strange weariness I'd never seen in him before. She felt it clear as day, their distress, like a cold draft touching her spirit. I overheard Counselor Malachi speaking to a group of concerned betas, his voice smooth and reassuring, like honey over stone. A passing ailment, nothing more, he'd said. The change of seasons often brings such weakness. Rest and common remedies will suffice. But then, his eyes had flicked towards me for just a second. And they were cold. So cold. Did he somehow blame me for the king's strange mood last night? Or was it something else entirely? This new sickness, it was a dark question mark hanging over us all. Meanwhile, my own small world offered little comfort. Back in my herb garden, more of my precious plants were succumbing to that ugly, black wilting at their roots. As if pulled by a string, my gaze fell on a patch of silverleaf, an herb my mother had always said was good for heart sickness and spirit aches. It too looked tired. So tired. That's why a fresh wave of despair washed over me. If even my healing plants were sick, what hope was there? Suddenly, I heard a weak cough nearby. It was Lyra's cousin, Elmsworth, a kind wolf I sometimes shared a quiet word with. He was slumped against my fence, his breathing shallow, his normally bright hazel eyes clouded with that same disturbing emptiness I'd seen in Torvin. His scent, It was off too. Faint. And wrong. Without thinking, my instincts surged. My hands, they just moved. I gathered a few specific leaves from plants that were still healthy, sunbright, moonglow petals, that deep earth root my mother spoke of. Because of that urgency, I crushed them. The scent, sharp, clean. Elmsworth, I whispered, my voice trembling. Try this, please. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in those dull eyes. Before he could speak, I pressed the small poultice to his muzzle. He inhaled, coughed, and then, in the span of a breath, a spark. Tiny, almost invisible, but it danced behind his eyes. It was there, then gone. I saw it though. He slumped further, still so terribly weak, but that flicker. Oh, was it hope? Or just my desperate imagination? This strange illness, and my even stranger reaction to it, felt like a path I was stumbling down in the dark. The days that followed felt like walking through a bad dream. A nightmare. To make things worse, the strange weariness spread like a shadowy vine through the Mooncrest pack. More wolves fell sick, their energy fading, their spirits dimming. And then Counselor Malachi's confident assurances about a passing ailment began to sound hollow, even to the most trusting ears. The common remedies did nothing. In fact, some seemed to make the afflicted even weaker. My heart ached for them, for the fear I saw growing in everyone's eyes. She didn't know what scared her more, the sickness itself, or the heavy, helpless feeling of knowing so little. That tiny flicker of response I'd seen in Elmsworth when I gave him my mother's herbs, it haunted me. Was it real? Could I do something when the pack healers were stumped? Despite that gnawing fear, a different kind of feeling began to bubble up inside me, a desperate, almost reckless need to try. What if those old ways, the things my mother had only hinted at, held an answer? That's why, after a sleepless night, listening to the distressed whimpers drifting from nearby dens, I made a decision. I had to speak to Alpha King Rylan. As if fate demanded it, the thought alone made my rejected mark throb with a fierce, confusing ache. He dismissed me so cruelly at the gala. He probably thought I was a fool, or worse. Yet, the image of those sick wolves, their fading light, it pushed me forward. How could I live with myself if I didn't at least try to share what little I knew, what little I suspected? This feeling, it wasn't just about obedience to my alpha, it was about the pack, our home, and a deep, instinctual pull to heal. So, with my heart pounding like a trapped bird, I approached the council rock where Alpha King Rylan was meeting with his advisors. Malachi at his side, looking more stern than usual. The moment their eyes locked, Rylan's and mine, the world seemed to stop. His face a mask of stone. But for a heartbeat, I saw that same flicker of raw shock I'd seen at the gala, quickly shuddered. Before I could move or lose my nerve, I spoke. My voice small, but clear. Alpha King Rylan, I began, I believe this sickness may not be what it seems. I think it's a spiritual ailment. My mother, she taught me some old ways. The silence stretched, heavy, absolute. Rylan just stared at me, his blue eyes like ice chips. And then Malachi stepped forward slightly, his gaze unreadable. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and fear, Rylan finally spoke. His voice low, colder than any winter wind. Leave the healing to those who understand it, Omega. Your feelings are not helpful. Without another word, he turned away. A clear dismissal. The shame, it burned through me hot and fierce. The other counselors looked away, some with pity, some with scorn. But then, as I stumbled back, defeated, my eyes met Counselor Malachi's. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His stare, a physical thing. Cold, sharp, a silent, chilling warning that promised. What? I didn't know. But it terrified me more than Rylan's public rejection. What had I just stumbled into? This path felt more dangerous than I could have ever imagined, and the shadows seemed to be deepening around me. The next few days were a blur of grief and quiet desperation. That night, the news came. Kale, one of our strongest warriors, a wolf known for his laughter and his unyielding strength, had succumbed to the blight. As if the forest watched, a hush fell over the entire pack. Kale, gone? It felt impossible. How could this happen? The fear in the pack became a living thing then, a cold mist that seeped into every den, every heart. My chest ached with a grief that was not just for Kale, but for all of us. I saw Alpha King Rylan at the morning fire, his face carved from granite. But his eyes held a pain so deep it made my own rejected mark throb in sympathy. He looked so alone, so burdened. Even so, what could I do? He had forbidden me to speak of my feelings. He and his council, especially Malachi, were pursuing their own methods. Methods that clearly weren't working. Despite that, I couldn't just stand by. Because of that deep, nagging instinct, I began to secretly prepare small bundles of the herbs my mother had shown me, Sunbright for clarity of spirit, Moonglow for soothing soul aches, the Earthroot for grounding. I didn't dare approach anyone directly. Instead, under the cover of twilight, I would leave them near the entrances of dens where the sickest lay, or close to the healer's tent, hoping, praying, that someone might find them, might try them. It was a small, desperate act of defiance, a whisper of hope against a roaring storm. Was I a fool? Maybe. But what else was a forgotten Omega, with a throbbing mark and a head full of her mother's strange, old secrets to do? This silent offering, it was all I had.
The blight, it was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, a ravenous beast, tearing through my pack. And then, with every warrior that stumbled, with every pup that whimpered with a fever that wouldn't break, a piece of my own spirit crumbled. Because of that, I practically lived in the ancient archives, the scent of old parchment and dust, a constant, choking presence in my lungs. My wolf, a restless storm inside me, hated this helplessness. He wanted to hunt, to fight, to do something. Truth be told, so did I. But what enemy could I sink my teeth into when it was an invisible sickness, stealing our strength, our future? Counselor Malachi was my shadow in those dusty halls, always ready with a supposedly helpful scroll, always guiding my research. Perhaps this lineage chart, my king, will show a past weakness. Or this record of ancient blights mentions similar symptoms, though the remedies are archaic. Still, it felt like wading through mud. Thick, suffocating. Every path Malachi suggested, a dead end. Moments later, after another fruitless night, I'd catch his eye, and he'd offer that same calm, reassuring nod. Patience, my king. The answers are here. We will find them. But then, sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I'd see him steer me away from certain alcoves, certain heavily bound tomes that looked far older, far more significant than the useless ledgers he kept handing me. Why? What was he not telling me? I didn't know what gnawed at me more. The thought that Malachi, my steadfast counsel, was fallible, or the terrifying suspicion that perhaps, just perhaps, he was deliberately keeping something from me. Looking back, I should have questioned his certainty much sooner, shouldn't I? Meanwhile, the very air in the archives felt thick with failure. The scent of despair from the pack below wafted even here, a constant, suffocating reminder of my inadequacy. As if pulled by a string, my hand would often go to my chest, where that phantom bond with the Omega from the Gala still throbbed, a dull, irritating ache. An Omega whose name I didn't even know. An Omega my wolf still howled for in the deepest recesses of my mind. What a damnable, twisted joke fate had played on me. This library of old words, it felt more like a tomb, and the answers I sought were buried too deep, or perhaps were never meant to be found by me. This library of old words, it felt more like a tomb, and the answers I sought were buried too deep, or perhaps were never meant to be found by me. A frustrating maze with no exit. A storm had descended upon Mooncrest, a physical manifestation of the turmoil tearing through my pack and my own soul. That's why the wind howled like a grieving wolf, and rain lashed against the stone walls of the stronghold, each gust a reproach. The main healing den was overflowing, the scent of sickness and fear, a choking miasma. So, some of the afflicted had been moved to one of the older, less used outbuildings near the forest's edge. Duty, cold and heavy, compelled me to inspect them, to offer what comfort an Alpha King could, which, truth be told, felt like precious little these days. So little and so useless. Still I went. More importantly, as I stepped into the dim, herb-scented air of the outbuilding, I saw her, that Omega from the Gala. Her fur, the color of soft river clay, seemed to absorb the flickering torchlight. She was tending to an elder, her movements surprisingly gentle, her focus absolute. An unwelcome jolt. That cursed bond, it flared in my chest. My wolf stirred. A low rumble of recognition? Interest. I ruthlessly suppressed it. Groll. No matter how hard I tried to ignore her presence, she was there. A quiet rebuke to my rejection. And then it happened. Old Lyra, one of our most ancient she-wolves, delirious with fever, reached out a trembling paw. Not to the Omega, but to me, her clouded eyes fixed on my face. "Rorik, my love," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "You came back. Rorik," her mate, lost to the great winter 50 seasons past. Before I could move, before I could speak, the name, the mistaken identity, it cracked the ice around my own grief. Without warning, Lyra's face swam before my eyes, her laughter echoing in the hollow chambers of my memory. My composure, so carefully maintained, fractured, gone. The sting in my eyes, the tightening in my throat. In that moment, I wasn't Rylan the king. I was Rylan the widower. Rylan broken. A beat later, I realized she was watching me. That Omega, her wide, Amber eyes, they weren't filled with triumph or scorn, but with empathy. Startling, profound empathy. My wolf snarled at the exposure. Even as a traitorous part of me felt a sliver of something less than utter desolation. What was this Omega doing to me? This unwanted connection was a dangerous current, pulling me into depths I had sworn never to explore again. Could this small Omega, this forgotten one, truly see the king behind the ice, the man behind the sorrow, the hope behind the despair? The old she-wolf's dying words, "The warden must awaken," echoed in my mind long after I'd left that cursed outbuilding. That night, I couldn't shake them, or the image of the Omega's understanding gaze. Warden? What warden? Malachi had never spoken of such a thing. Because of that insistent echo, I found myself observing Malachi with a new, sharper scrutiny. His reassurances about the blight, his carefully curated research paths in the archives, they suddenly felt less like wisdom and more like careful stage management. Was I being paranoid? Or was my grief finally cracking enough to let some uncomfortable truths seep in? What would you have done, faced with such a loyal advisor and such persistent, damning failures? Even so, I had no proof, only a growing unease, a king's intuition that had been dulled by years of sorrow but was now, slowly, painfully, reawakening. Despite that lack of concrete evidence, I felt compelled to act. As if pulled by a string, I found myself back in the archives, not in the sections Malachi favored, but in a forgotten alcove, one he'd once dismissed as containing only fractured Omega lore and nonsensical prophecies. My fingers brushed against a slim, leather-bound scroll, its ties brittle with age. It was heavily redacted, entire passages inked out by a long-dead scribe's hand. But then, one phrase, almost missed, leaped out at me. When the shadow pact stirs and the king's line is weakened by sorrow, only the blood of the first bloom, the true spirit warden, can rebalance the scales. My blood ran cold. Shadow pact. Spirit warden? These were terms Malachi had never mentioned. Why? What else was he hiding from me, from the entire pack? This revelation wasn't just a clue. It was a betrayal echoing through generations, a truth buried under layers of deliberate omission, a conspiracy of silence that now threatened to consume us all. Soon after this discovery, the healers sent an urgent summons. Young Alara's pup, Lyra's namesake, little Lily, was fading fast. The blight was consuming her, and all their remedies, all of Malachi's prescribed treatments, had failed, utterly. As the silence stretched in the den around the pup's weak form, I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. This was it, my ultimate failure as Alpha King. And then, a movement at the den entrance. It was her again, the Omega from the gala. Her amber eyes, usually so hesitant, now blazed with a desperate, almost fierce conviction. Her scent, that mix of wild herbs and something uniquely her, cut through the heavy air of sickness. She felt it, clear as day, the pull of our bond, a searing current even now. Without thinking, she stepped forward. Alpha King Rylan. Her voice was low, trembling slightly, but held an unexpected strength. Forgive my presumption, but I believe I can help her. The illness, it is not of the body alone. It touches the spirit. My mother, she taught me of such things. Before either could speak, Malachi materialized at my side, his face a mask of stern disapproval. "My king," he hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. Surely you will not entertain this Omega nonsense. Her mother's teachings? We are dealing with a physical blight, not fanciful spirits. We must redouble our efforts with proven methods. His words, logical, sensible, everything I had been taught to trust. Yet, Lily, fading, and this Omega, her eyes blazing with that desperate fire. That cursed bond, it throbbed. My wolf, healer, trust. She is key. It roared inside me, a desperate counterpoint to Malachi's poison. What choice did I have? None. No sane choice left. Do it, I commanded her. The words, torn from me. Against everything. Against Malachi. How could I not see the desperation in her eyes, the truth in her plea, the last chance for the pup, for my pack, for my own fractured soul? This was a precipice, a choice between the familiar, failing path and a wild, unknown leap of faith that could damn us all, or perhaps, just perhaps, save us.
The air in the small den was thick with despair, so heavy it felt like I could barely breathe. And then there was little Lily, Alpha King Rylan's namesake, so tiny and still beneath the furs, her breath just a faint flutter. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Because of that fear, my hands trembled as I clutched my mother's worn journal. Rylan's command, "Do it," still echoed in my ears, a desperate lifeline thrown in a raging storm. Counselor Malachi stood in the shadows near the doorway, his presence a cold weight, his eyes like chips of obsidian, fixed on me. Truth be told, his silent disapproval was almost as terrifying as the thought of failing. But Lily, I had to try. Still, I took a deep breath, pushing down my terror. Moments later, I began. My voice a low, shaky whisper reciting the ancient words from the journal, words that felt strange and yet deeply familiar on my tongue. As if pulled by a string, I crushed the herbs my mother had described, the ones that glowed faintly in the dim light, their scent sharp, clean, and oddly powerful. She felt it clear as day, a warmth spreading from my hands as I gently touched Lily's fevered brow. It wasn't my warmth. It was something older, stronger, like a river of starlight flowing through me, down my arms, into the pup. But then, the energy. It surged, almost too bright, too strong. I gasped, my own body trembling with the force of it. Rylan, a sharp sound from him. A strangled growl, but he didn't move. I could feel his gaze, burning into me. Intense. Unreadable. Looking back, I should have realized that power, true power, always comes with a price, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Lily stirred. A tiny sigh escaped her lips. And then her breathing, so shallow before, deepened. Color, a faint, healthy pink, crept back into her small, pale muzzle. Without warning, her eyes fluttered open. Not clouded with sickness anymore, but clear, looking right at me with a dawning, innocent recognition. A collective gasp went through the healers gathered behind Rylan. As the silence stretched, I felt a bone-deep exhaustion wash over me, my legs threatening to buckle. In that moment, I knew. My mother's lore, it was real. And somehow it lived in me. Malachi stepped forward then, his voice smooth as oil. A temporary reprieve, perhaps, Alpha King. But such unpredictable methods. His words were a cold splash of water, but they couldn't extinguish the tiny, fragile flame of hope that had just been lit in the heart of the dying den. This strange power, this unexpected success, what would it mean for me? For the pack? The news of Lily's miraculous improvement spread through the Mooncrest pack faster than a winter wind. That's why, for a little while, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Some wolves, those whose pups had also suffered, looked at me with a new light in their eyes. Awe, gratitude, maybe even a little fear. Still, it wasn't all sunshine. Truth be told, other whispers followed in the wake of the good news, like shadows stretching long in the afternoon. These whispers, they were colder, sharper, unnatural, OmegaMagic, not to be trusted. Because of that growing unease, I found myself retreating further into the quiet of my small cottage, the joy of Lily's recovery tainted by a new kind of anxiety. More importantly, I knew who was fanning those flames of suspicion. Counselor Malachi. I didn't hear him say the words myself, not directly. But then, I'd see him speaking in hushed tones with the other pack elders, his distinguished head bent close, his expressions grave. And then, those same elders would look at me with narrowed eyes. Their faces shuddered. No matter how hard I tried to appear calm, their distrust pricked at my skin like thorns. It was as if my small act of healing had unleashed something else, something dark and divisive. The pack felt unsettled, fractured. Did they think I was some kind of dark sorceress now? How could one act of desperation twist into something so menacing in their minds? Soon after Lily was declared truly out of danger, Alpha King Rylan summoned me. Not to the public council rock, but to his private study. The heart of his power, a place few Omegas ever entered. As if pulled by a string, my old fear returned, but this time it was mixed with a strange, thrumming awareness of the bond that still pulsed faintly between us, a rejected thing that refused to die. His scent, pine, winter frost, and something uniquely him, something wild and powerful, filled the air, making my mark tingle with a confusing mix of pain and longing. He was alone, standing by that massive stone window, staring out at the storm-racked valley. As the silence stretched, he finally turned. His blue eyes were like chips of ice, yet there was something else in their depths today. A searching, a raw desperation I recognized because it mirrored my own. The pup, Lily, she will live, he stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its earlier harshness. A beat later, he gestured to a chair. Tell me, Omega. Tell me about your mother. About this magic. His questions relentless, intense. He wanted to know everything. About the journal, the spirit wardens, the pact of Ashwood Glen I'd barely deciphered. And so I told him what little I knew, my voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as I spoke of my mother's forgotten lore. He listened, his gaze never leaving my face, his expression unreadable. When her name left his lips, Arya, he said it softly, the first time he'd ever used my name. My heart skipped. In the quiet that followed my explanation, he simply nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. You may go. No thanks. No reassurance. Just dismissal. I left his study with more questions than answers. Had I helped? Or had I just revealed a dangerous secret that would make things even worse for me, for everyone? This king, this broken alpha who was my fated mate, what was he truly thinking? His silence was a heavy cloak, impossible to see through, and my own future felt balanced on the edge of a knife. Could a single act of healing mend a bond so brutally broken, or had I only deepened the chasm between us, between our worlds, between our fates? A few hours later, a knot of dread, so tight it stole my breath, had settled deep in my stomach. That's why I couldn't rest. The king's silence. Malachi's earlier warning, it all felt like a gathering storm. As if summoned by my fear, I heard raised voices coming from the direction of Rylan's study. Sharp, angry. One voice was Rylan's, a low, furious growl I'd never heard from him before. And then the other, Malachi's, higher, almost shrill with a note of, was it panic or triumph? My wolf pressed forward, a sudden, inexplicable urge to know, to see. Her instincts searched. Without thinking, I found myself creeping down the stone corridor, the flickering torchlight casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. As the echo faded from a particularly sharp outburst, I reached the heavy oak door to his study. It was slightly ajar. My breath caught. Malachi's voice, venomous and loud, slithered out. A dangerous conduit, Alpha King. Her healing is a trick, a lure from the shadow itself. She is the true blight, the warden who will lead us all to ruin, not salvation. She is the enemy. My world tilted. Me, a conduit for the shadow. Ruin? Before I could move, before I could even breathe around the horror of his words, the door was flung open. In that moment, Malachi stood there, his face contorted in a mask of righteous fury, his eyes blazing with a zealot's light. He pointed a trembling claw straight at me. There is the harbinger of our doom, he shrieked. And then, pack guards, their faces grim and confused, alerted by the commotion, appeared behind him in the corridor. Their eyes fixed on me. Not with confusion, no, but with a dawning, hostile understanding, fanned by Malachi's poisonous accusation. As if the world narrowed, all I could see were their faces, their suspicion, their fear, directed at me. My heart skipped, then hammered against my ribs like a wild drum. Alpha King Rylan stood just inside his study, his expression unreadable, caught between his lifelong advisor and the Omega he had just begun to question. What would he do? This accusation, this betrayal by Malachi, it felt like a death sentence. My brief moment of hope, of feeling useful, had just shattered into a million icy pieces. The hope for acceptance, the dream of belonging, the fragile bud of a new beginning, all crushed under the weight of his hateful words.
Malachi's shriek, harbinger of doom. It ripped through my study, pointing at her, at Arya, the Omega who carried the other half of this cursed, blazing bond. And then my guards, they surged forward, confusion warring with ingrained obedience on their faces. My lifelong advisor, my father's friend, had just condemned her. Because of that madness, my wolf, he didn't hesitate. He roared, "Stand down." My alpha command thundered, shaking the very stones. Some guards froze. Others, Malachi's puppets already, they lunged for Arya, Chaos. A blur of fur and fury. Still I moved. Faster than I thought possible. I was between Arya and the threat in a heartbeat. Malachi has betrayed us. I yelled, my voice raw. He speaks poison. The illness, it's a shadow pact he knew of. He hid it. Moments later, I saw the flicker of understanding in some eyes, the dawning horror. But others were too far gone in their fear, too loyal to the old ways Malachi represented. But then, I met Arya's terrified gaze. That Omega, she held a key. My wolf knew it. The hidden passage, behind the tapestry. I snarled at her, shoving her towards it. Go. Your journal. Find something. Anything. I'll hold them. I didn't know if she'd make it. If I could even buy her time. Before she could move fully, as she scrambled for the passage, Malachi, his face a mask of pure, twisted rage, screamed. He unleashed a torrent of black, oily energy from some damned amulet he wore. Straight at me. It slammed into my chest like a battering ram, cold, corrupting, stealing my breath, my strength. Meanwhile, the pain was unimaginable, not just physical. This was a spiritual poison, a darkness that clawed at my very essence, at my alpha core. As if pulled by a string, my knees buckled, but I wouldn't fall. Not while she was still in danger. Malachi cackled, a dry, rasping sound. You see, my king, the pact demands its due. You should have listened. You should have made the old sacrifices. His eyes, they glowed with that same sickly green light I'd seen on those blighted oaks. That's why I knew he was no longer just Malachi. He was a mouthpiece, a conduit for that ancient, hungry shadow. Because of that sickening realization, fury, cold and sharp, cut through the pain. I lunged, my claws extended, a true alpha growl tearing from my throat. We met in a clash of fury and desperate power. He was stronger than he should be, drawing on that damned pact. More importantly, every blow he landed, every wave of that shadow energy he threw, didn't just wound my body. It felt like it was draining the life from the pack itself. I could feel it, a distant, echoing cry of their spirits weakening. In fact, Malachi seemed to feed on it. Your pack withers, Rylan, he taunted, his voice distorted. Their vitality flows to the master, and soon to me, the new steward. He spoke of the pact's true price then, not just a slow drain, but a deliberate corruption, a twisting of spirit until the pack became willing slaves to the shadow. And he, Malachi, had been managing this decline for years, waiting for his moment. Truth be told, the depth of his betrayal was a venom worse than the magic. My Lyra, had she known any of this? Had this shadow touched her too? The thought was a fresh agony. Looking back, I should have seen the ambition in his eyes years ago, hidden beneath that veneer of loyal service. What a fool I'd been. How could I not see the wolf in sheep's clothing, the serpent in our den, the decay at our roots? Soon after that horrifying revelation, the fight spilled from my study into the stronghold corridors. What's worse, the very air grew colder, heavier. Shadowy tendrils, slick and black, slithered from the corners of the stonework. Some of my own pack members, their eyes glowing with that same unholy green light as Malachi's amulet, turned on their own. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, their snarls filled with a mindless aggression. The illness, it wasn't just killing them. It was twisting them, corrupting them. My heart shattered. These were my people. To make things worse, with every corrupted wolf that fell to my loyal warriors, or to my own claws, I felt another piece of my soul tear away. This wasn't a battle. It was a butchery, a desecration. Despite that horror, I rallied the few warriors still loyal, their faces grim, their eyes wide with terror, but also a fierce, desperate loyalty. For Mooncrest, I roared, my voice cracking. Protect the dens. Protect the innocent. We fought back to back, a desperate, dwindling island of true wolves in a sea of encroaching shadow. Malachi, he was a whirlwind of dark power now, laughing as he cut down those who opposed him, his corrupted followers swelling his ranks. As the silence stretched between horrifying clashes, all I could hear was the whimpering of pups, the screams of the dying, the cackling of my once trusted advisor. My strength was failing. The pack's drain, Malachi's attacks, the despair, it was all too much. Where was Arya? Had she found anything? Or had I sent her to her death for nothing? Could any hope possibly pierce this suffocating, all-consuming night? What would you have done in such a desperate hour, with your kingdom crumbling around you? By the time I found myself backed against a cold stone wall, Malachi and a dozen corrupted wolves closing in, I was at my limit. My vision tunneled. My breath rasped. The shadow energy that had struck me earlier, it pulsed like a living thing inside my chest, cold and heavy, dragging me down. This was it then. My end. Lyra. I'd be with her soon. But then, without warning, a jolt. Not of pain, not of darkness, but of light. Pure, desperate, strong. It slammed into my mind, into my very soul, through that fated bond one had cursed and rejected. Arya. She felt it, clear as day. Her terror, yes, but beneath it, a will of iron. A surge of raw, untamed power. And her location, deep beneath the stronghold, in the place of the ancient whispers. In that moment, something inside me snapped, not in defeat, but in a resurgence of every primal instinct I possessed. My mate was in danger. My mate was calling to me. My mate held the key. As if the world narrowed to that single, burning point of connection, the despair vanished, replaced by a cold, burning alpha fury I hadn't felt in years. The shadowy drain on my spirit, it recoiled. My wounds still screamed, but my wolf, he answered her call. He rose, magnificent and terrible. Arya. The name tore from my throat, not a plea, but a vow, a promise, a war cry. Hope, fierce and wild, blazed through me. I would reach her. I would. The pack, the shadows, Malachi, they would all fall before me if they stood in my way. This bond, this fated connection I had fought against, it was now my only anchor, my only weapon, my only salvation.
My desperate call to Rylan, it had flown from my soul like a frightened bird into a hurricane. And then, the chamber, that terrible, ancient place beneath the stronghold, it pulsed with an even deeper cold. The shadow entity, it was here. Not just a whisper anymore, but a presence. Vast, ancient, and filled with a hunger that threatened to swallow me whole. Because of that terror, my legs trembled so hard I thought I'd fall. Its voice, if you could even call it that, slithered into my mind, not with words, but with images of despair, of my pack withering, of Rylan falling. So the little warden seeks to defy me, it seemed to sneer. Brave or merely foolish? My mother's journal had spoken of such entities, of their power to crush spirits. How could I possibly stand against this? This abyss. Still, through this suffocating dread, A tiny thread of warmth pulsed against my own spirit. Rylan. Moments later, I could feel him through our bond, a distant, furious comet of resolve streaking through the besieged stronghold above. He was fighting. He was coming. But then, the entity seemed to laugh, a soundless vibration that shook my bones. He cannot save you, little warden. No one can. This pact is eternal. Your line was meant to serve it, or be broken by it. She didn't know what scared her more. I didn't know what chilled me more. The entity's crushing power, or the horrifying possibility that it spoke the truth about my ancestors. Had they truly been servants to this darkness? No. My mother's journal spoke of spirit wardens as balancers, as healers of such wounds. Looking back, how could I have been so naive to think this would be easy, that a few herbs and ancient words could fix a wound so deep? Meanwhile, the entity intensified its assault. Visions flooded my mind, horrible, tempting things. As if pulled by a string, I saw Mooncrest thriving, peaceful, the blight gone, but only if I agreed to become its new steward, its new Malachi, binding myself, my spirit, to its will. Forever. And then, the alternative, Rylan, broken and defeated, our pack enslaved, their spirits hollowed out, their eyes glowing with that same sickly green light I'd seen in Malachi's amulet. Choose, little warden, the shadow whispered, its voice coiling around my heart like a serpent. Order under my wing, or utter desolation under your defiance. What is one small Omega spirit against the tide of ages? That's why tears streamed down my face. The pressure was immense. My own small desires for love, for belonging, they warred with the terror of submission, the horror of my pack's destruction. My wolf, my gentle Omega wolf, it whimpered deep inside me, pressing against my ribs, seeking comfort I couldn't give. Without thinking, I clutched the worn leather of my mother's journal, my only anchor in this storm of shadows. Her words, her strength. I drew upon them. Her body moved on instinct, or rather, my spirit did. I pushed back against the visions, against the seductive lies. No! I cried out, my voice surprisingly strong in the echoing chamber. My pack will never be slaves. Not while I draw breath. Because of that defiance, the entity recoiled for a heartbeat, its shadowy form flickering with surprise? Or was it anger? Before I could move, the withered ancient tree at the chamber's heart pulsed violently, its sickly light flaring, the cracks in its bark weeping a dark, viscous substance. The oppressive weight in the chamber doubled. I was faltering, sinking, my own light dimming. Rylan, where was he? Could he even feel my fading strength, my terror, my desperate, undying love for him, for our people? Just like that, when I thought all was lost, when the shadows were about to consume me whole, he was there. In the span of a breath, Rylan burst into the chamber. Not as the grieving king I'd first known, but as a true alpha, a storm of righteous fury and desperate resolve. He was wounded, his fur matted, his breathing ragged, but his eyes, those incredible blue eyes, they blazed with a light that seared the darkness. Arya, his voice a roar, a lifeline, and then Malachi. The traitor slunk in behind him, his face a mask of manic glee, his eyes glowing with that unholy green light. Too late, Alpha King, Malachi shrieked. The warden weakens. The master will claim his due. As the truth unraveled before me, Rylan didn't even glance at the traitor. His gaze was locked on mine. He charged, straight through the oppressive shadows, straight towards me. The moment their eyes locked, no, the moment our hands touched as he reached me, our fated mate bond didn't just flare. It exploded. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a shield of pure, incandescent light erupted around us. Gold and silver light, his alpha power, my awakened warden spirit, twining together, pushing back the crushing darkness, the chilling whispers of the entity. It was a shield of defiance, a shield of hope, a shield of love. But then, even as I clung to him, to that incredible, shared power, I saw the entity recoil, then surge forward with renewed, monstrous force. Malachi was cackling, pouring more of his corrupted essence into the onslaught. Our shield, it flickered. It buckled. The space between them burned, and yet it wasn't enough. The ancient tree groaned, its dark heart pulsing faster, demanding more. I looked at Rylan, at his beloved, pain-etched face, and I knew what had to be done. This ancient evil, this festering wound in our world, I thought, how could we ever truly heal it without a sacrifice to match its terrible hunger? With every heartbeat, our shield thinned. Cracks of shadow spiderwebbed across our light. Deep down, I knew the truth. The entity wanted a life, a soul, to fully re-anchor the pact or to finally break it with cataclysmic force. And then I saw it in Rylan's eyes, the resolve, the decision. He was going to offer himself, to throw his alpha life force into the maw of that abyss to save me, to save our pack. My Rylan, my king, my mate. No! The word was a silent scream in my soul. Her wolf pressed forward. I couldn't let him. Not after everything. Before the words left her lips, or rather, before he could voice his intent, I knew what I had to do. My mother's journal, it had hinted at the ultimate act of a spirit warden, not just to fight the shadow, but to transform it, to heal the source. As if fate whispered, the answer blazed in my mind, terrible and clear. The ancient tree, it was the heart of the pact, the anchor. It needed not destruction, but purification. A willing offering of pure, untainted spirit. Without another word, I pulled away from Rylan's protective embrace just enough to turn towards the groaning, light-drinking tree. Arya, no. His voice was raw agony. But then I smiled at him, a watery, trembling smile. It's the only way, my love. Trust me. And she let it happen. I placed my hands upon the blighted bark. It felt like ice and fire, ancient and utterly corrupt. As the bond pulsed between us, I drew upon every ounce of my awakened warden spirit, not the wild, chaotic power, but its purest, most selfless essence. The part of me that was sunlight and moonglow and the deep, quiet strength of the earth. I offered it to the tree, pushing it in, a torrent of cleansing light into that festering darkness. The pain, oh, goddesses, the pain. It was like being torn apart, soul from spirit. I screamed. A raw, keening sound that was swallowed by the sudden, blinding explosion of pure, white light that erupted from the tree, consuming everything. Malachi shrieked, his borrowed power ripped away. The shadow entity, it howled, a sound of cosmic fury and release, and then nothing. Just fading light and a terrible, falling weakness into Rylan's strong, waiting arms. Was it over? Had I saved them?
The blinding light, it faded. And then an almost deafening silence filled the ancient chamber, a silence so profound it felt like the world itself had exhaled a breath held for centuries. The oppressive cold, that soul-leeching dread of the shadow entity, gone, vanished as if it had never been. Because of that sudden void, the air felt clean, thin, almost too bright. My arm, no, Arya, lay limp in my arms. So pale, so terribly still. Her scent, usually wild herbs, and that unique spark of her spirit, was faint, too faint. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through the awe of our victory. Had she won, only to lose herself? Arya? My voice was a raw whisper. Still, I clutched her to me, my heart a frantic drum against her stillness. My loyal warriors, those who had followed me into this abyss, were picking themselves up, their faces etched with exhaustion, disbelief, and a dawning, fragile hope. Moments later, I saw Malachi, broken, powerless, his borrowed darkness stripped away, leaving him just an old, withered wolf, his eyes empty. Justice could wait. Arya could not. But then, as I lifted her, intending to carry her back to the light, her eyelids fluttered. Just a fraction. As if pulled by a string, my own breath hitched. Her lips moved, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. The tree. She breathed, her eyes still closed. Rylan, it sings now. And then she was limp again. The tree sings? What did that mean? But she was alive. That was all that mattered. That was everything. This small Omega, this forgotten spirit, she had saved us all. Meanwhile, the journey back through the stronghold was like walking from deepest night into a hesitant dawn. That's why, with every step, I saw signs of the miracle Arya had wrought. The shadowy tendrils that had choked our halls, gone. The green, sickly light in the eyes of the afflicted, fading. Wolves who had been listless, lost in the blight's despair, were stirring. Confusion, then dawning awareness, replacing the vacant horror. Truth be told, I barely registered their awed stares as I passed, Arya cradled protectively in my arms. My focus was solely on her, on the faint but steady beat of her heart against mine. More importantly, her sacrifice, her incredible courage. It was a fire in my soul, burning away the last vestiges of my own frozen grief. Lyra would always be a cherished memory, a gentle sorrow. But Arya was a blazing sunrise. My mate, my salvation, this fragile hope, this new dawn she had bought us. How could I ever be worthy of it? The days that followed were a vigil, and then some nights, they blurred into a seamless flow of worry and fierce, protective tenderness. Arya lay in my chambers, our chambers now, though I slept on a pallet by her bedside, unwilling to leave her for a moment. Because of that constant proximity, I learned the rhythm of her unconscious breathing, the slight frown that creased her brow when a memory flickered behind her closed eyelids, the way her fingers would sometimes twitch, as if reaching for something or someone. The pack healers, their faces a mixture of awe and concern, tended her with a reverence they usually reserved for sacred relics. Old Lyra, one of the wisest, her own eyes now clear of the blight, would often sit with me. "Her spirit is altered, my king," Lyra had murmured one evening, her gaze on Aria's peaceful face. The part she gave to the tree, it was a profound offering. "She is not diminished, no, but refined, like silver purified in the hottest fire. Purer, stronger in ways we may not yet understand." Still, I worried. No matter how hard she tried, or rather, how hard I hoped, her recovery was slow. I would speak to her, telling her of the pack's healing, of the sunlight returning to Mooncrest, of the way the ancient tree in the chamber below now pulsed with a soft, gentle light, its leaves a vibrant, healthy green. Sometimes I'd just hold her hand, pouring my strength, my gratitude, my dawning, terrifying love into her through our bond, hoping she could feel it. She didn't know what scared her more. Rephrasing. I didn't know what terrified me more. The thought that she might never fully awaken, or the fear of facing my own future, my own heart, if she did. Looking back, those quiet days of watching her heal were when I truly began to heal myself, weren't they? The ice around my own heart, built over 5 years of desolate grief, was finally, irrevocably, melting. This Omega, this Aria, she was not a replacement for Lyra. She was something new, something miraculous, something I was desperate not to fail. Soon after Aria began to consistently open her eyes, to speak in more than just whispers, I knew the pack needed its king. Despite that internal pull to remain by her side, I convened a council. The Great Hall was different, subdued. The usual boisterous confidence replaced by a somber understanding of how close we had come to utter annihilation. Malachi's seat was empty, a stark reminder of his betrayal. As if the forest watched, every eye was on me. So, I told them everything. The Shadow Pact, Malachi's generations of deceit, Aria's forgotten lineage as a spirit warden, her incredible sacrifice, the raw honesty. It was a heavy burden to share, but a necessary one. Anger rippled through the assembly, then grief, then a stunned silence. And then, Aria, leaning on my arm but her gaze clear and steady, spoke. Her voice, though still weak, resonated with a quiet authority, a deep compassion. She spoke not of vengeance, but of healing the pack's spiritual wounds, of rebuilding on truth. In that moment, I felt a pride so fierce, so profound, it almost brought me to my knees. This was my Luna, my mate. Before the words left her lips, I knew what I had to do. I formally declared the Shadow Pact broken, its dark legacy ended. Because of that declaration, I proposed new covenants for our pack. Transparency in leadership, the restoration of forgotten lore, the honoring of all gifts, especially the spiritual. And I named Aria, before them all, as the spirit warden of Mooncrest, her role as vital as any warrior, as any alpha. As if summoned by this new beginning, a ray of sunlight broke through the high windows, illuminating her, my brave, resilient Aria. But then, old Kalin, an elder whose wisdom I respected, rose. Alpha King, Luna Aria, he began, his voice raspy with emotion. Malachi, what becomes of him? And is the shadow truly gone? Or does it merely sleep, waiting for another chance, another weakness? His questions, they were the unspoken fear of the entire pack, weren't they? And they were questions I had to answer for all our sakes. The days grew warmer, the land itself seeming to sigh in relief. That night, after the council, after the difficult decisions about Malachi's fate, exile, A life of solitary repentance far from our borders. I found Arya in the grove near the now-thriving ancient tree. Its leaves rustled, a soft, musical sound, almost like it was singing, just as she'd whispered. The wind carried his name, or rather, it carried her scent, wild herbs, and that unique, clean fragrance of her spirit, a scent that now meant home. As the silence stretched between us, I knew I couldn't hold back any longer. The words, the feelings I'd kept locked away for so long, even from myself, they had to be spoken. Arya. My voice was rough, thick with emotions I was still learning to name. She turned, her amber eyes soft in the twilight, a gentle question in them. Her bones remembered him, or perhaps my soul remembered its other half. I was a fool. I began, the confession tearing from me, blinded by grief, by fear. I rejected you. I rejected this. I gestured between us, to the bond that now pulsed with a warm, steady light, no longer a source of confusion, but of profound strength. What you did for the pack, for me, there are no words. Her thoughts spun. I could almost see them in her eyes. Rylan, she whispered, her voice like the breeze in the leaves. And then, I was closing the distance between us. I love you, Arya, I said, the words raw, honest, finally free. More than life, more than my own damn pride. You are my mate, my Luna, my heart. With his scent in the air, her eyes welled with tears, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy, of relief. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, or so it felt to me as I saw the answering emotion in her gaze, she reached for me. The air thickened. Our first true kiss, beneath that singing tree, was not the desperate, fiery claiming of a new bond, but something deeper. It was a healing, a promise, a homecoming. Years of ice, of grief, of lonely duty, they melted away in the warmth of her lips, in the fierce, tender pulse of our shared spirit. Time stood still. It was a kiss that spoke of battles fought and won, of shadows banished, of two broken souls finding their way back to the light, together. This was not just desire. It was a reckoning, a redemption, a love story finally allowed to breathe. And in that moment, I knew, with uncertainty that settled deep in my bones, that our journey was far from over, but whatever came next, we would face it, side by side, our hearts finally, truly, beating as one.
The sun, it felt like a warm blessing on my fur as I stood beside Rylan, my Rylan, before the entire Mooncrest pack. And then, the ancient tree, the one I'd poured my spirit into, it sang behind us. Not with sound, exactly, but with a vibrant, thrumming life that resonated deep in my bones, its leaves the color of emeralds, its bark smooth and silvered with pure energy. Because of that incredible backdrop, the ceremony wasn't just a formality. It felt sacred. Rylan's voice, strong and sure, formally presented me Arya Vale, once the forgotten Omega, as his Luna, his mate, and as the pack's spirit warden. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it made my chest ache. Truth be told, I still couldn't quite believe it. Me, his Luna. Still, the faces of the pack, they were open now, filled with respect, with gratitude. Gone was the suspicion, the fear Malachi had sown. Moments later, little Lily, the pup whose life had been the first spark of this new path, she shyly approached me, her small paws hesitant. But then, in her tiny hand, she held out a single sun thistle, the very herb that had first shown me the blight's unnatural touch. As if pulled by a string, I reached for it. And then, as my fingers brushed its petals, it pulsed. A soft, golden glow, mirroring the light of the singing tree. A gasp went through the crowd. A child's gift, a symbol of hope, of the land itself breathing free again. She felt it clear as day. This was my place, my purpose, my pack, my home. Looking back, how could I have ever imagined that my deepest sorrow would lead to my greatest joy? This new beginning, it was more than I could have ever dreamed. Meanwhile, months melted away like spring snow, each day a testament to the pack's healing, to our healing. Mooncrest thrived. That's why laughter echoed in the valley again. Pups tumbled freely, their pelts glossy and their eyes bright with mischief. The blight was a fading nightmare. Truth be told, the land itself seemed to rejoice, the forests lush, the rivers sparkling like a ribbon of diamonds. Rylan and I, we worked side by side. He led with a strength now tempered by a deep, quiet wisdom, his alpha power a shield for our people, not a hammer. More importantly, I found my own rhythm as spirit warden, teaching the young ones about the old ways, about the balance of spirit and earth, about the songs of the ancient trees. My mother's journal, it was no longer a source of fearful secrets, but a wellspring of guidance and ancestral strength. In fact, one golden afternoon, while walking the northern boundary with Rylan, his hand in mine, a comfortable, familiar weight, we found them. Without warning, half hidden beneath a curtain of ancient ivy, stood a circle of warding stones. Old. So incredibly old. Their surfaces were worn smooth by time and weather, covered in faded symbols I recognized from the deepest passages of my mother's journal. As if summoned, a faint, dormant energy hummed from them, a protective thrum that resonated with the singing tree miles away and with the very core of my being. Not only that, Rylan felt it too. His eyes widened, then softened with a kind of awe. Our ancestors, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. They left us guardians, Arya. Protectors against shadows we never knew existed. Because of that discovery, we knew our work was not just about healing the present, but about honoring and understanding the past. These stones, these silent sentinels, they were another open loop, weren't they? A whisper of ancient magic, not of threat, but of enduring protection. That night, we found ourselves drawn back to our tree, the singing heart of Mooncrest. Beneath the moonlight, its leaves rustled, a soft lullaby. The air was cool, scented with pine and damp earth, and the even more intoxicating scent of Rylan, my mate. As the silence stretched, comfortable and deep, I leaned against his strong side, his arm wrapping around me, holding me close. The healers say your spirit is different. Arya, he murmured, his lips brushing my fur. Stronger, purer. But are you truly whole, my love? After what you gave? My thoughts spun for a moment, considering his gentle question. Truth be told, a part of my wilder, untamed Omega spirit had been offered to the tree, to the land. Yet it wasn't lost. It was transformed, refined. like a raw gem polished into a brilliant jewel. Instead of feeling diminished, I felt more connected, more Arya than I had ever been. I am whole, Rylan, I whispered, my voice trembling with the depth of my emotion. More than whole. The tree, it sings with a part of me, yes, but it also sings to me. It's a different song now, a song of balance, of peace. And then I placed my hand over my own gently rounded belly, where a new, tiny heartbeat was a secret song only we, and perhaps the ancient tree, yet knew. With his scent in the air, Rylan's eyes followed my movement. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, or rather, as a joy so fierce it felt like fire bloomed in my heart, I saw the dawning wonder, the sheer, unadulterated love in his gaze. Before either could speak, he knelt, pressing his cheek to my belly, a low, rumbling purr starting deep in his chest. Our future. He choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears. Our promise. Yes, our promise of a new dawn, a new song, a new life. This fairy tale, it wasn't just an ending. It was a vibrant, beautiful beginning. Eventually, as a new sun painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, we stood on the highest precipice of Mooncrest, looking out over our healed, thriving lands. The wind carried his name, my Rylan's name, as he pulled me close, his strong arms a haven. Her soul answered, my soul answered his, in a silent symphony of love and belonging. The journey had been brutal, a path paved with rejection, fear, betrayal, and agonizing sacrifice. We had faced the deepest shadows within ourselves and from the ancient world. But then we had found the light. Together. As if the world narrowed to just this perfect moment, I leaned my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that matched my own. The forever unmated Omega, the broken Alpha King. We were legends now, they said. A story whispered on the wind, a testament to a love forged in fire, a fairy tale ending written in courage and truth. And just like that, everything changed, or rather, everything had found its rightful place. This was more than peace. This was everything. This was home. This was love. And it was forever.